Annual commemoration this year in honor of the 71st anniversary on the attack of Pearl Harbor. Our program today is done in partnership with the National Park Service and the United States Navy. The weather is incredible. I don't know if you were here last year, any of you, but it was pouring rain and freezing cold. This is one of the best turnouts we've ever had. We're going to have an exciting program. All please rise for the posting of colors and remain standing for our national anthem. Advance colors. Dave, prepare for the national anthem. Chief Whittle.
Left, face. Free bend. On.
Dave.
Nice shot. Forward. Front.
Please be seated. Big thank you to the USS Constitution Color Guard. Before I ask Superintendent Cassius Cash to come up and say a few words, I'd like to acknowledge a few people in the audience. Gold Star Mother Florence Johnson, thank you for being with us today. Pearl Harbor survivors. We have 4 this year. 2 who found us. Don Tabbitt, former president of the Pearl Harbor Survivors and Friends Association. Francis Conley, new to joining us today. Thank you, Francis. Jerry Haldeman. Thank you, Jerry, for being with us. And Emery Arsenal. Thank you, guys. I want to recognize Commander Matthew Bonner, 72nd in command, USS Constitution. Commander Robert Gillen, former commanding officer, Constitution, and military liaison for the National Park Service. Commander Sam Morris, American Legion Post 26, Charlestown, James Conway Post. Former Commander Eileen Locke. Thank you for being with us, Eileen. Captain Harry Weinberg, Region Commander of the Military Order of World Wars. Captain Mundo, past Region Commander, Military Order of World Wars. One of our favorite people, Patricia Farris, World War II Navy veteran, National Park Service volunteer, extraordinaire. Thanks, Pat. Marion Curtis, former secretary, Pearl Harbor Survivors Association. Marion's been with us with Dawn for decades. Thank you again for everything you do. Danny Ryan, I see in the audience from Congressman Capuano's office. Thank you. Commissioner of Veteran Services, I saw around here. Yep, thank you for being with us on so many of these occasions. Francis Urena. And we have a special guest that I just found out about 10 minutes ago is going to be here, which is just remarkable. We have the grandson of Captain Franklin Van Valkenburg. He was the commanding officer on the USS Arizona, killed in action in 1941, and his grandson found us. He's here with us today. Kay Van Valkenburg. Great day. Thank you for being with us. One of our volunteers whose father served on the USS Vestal, which was tied up to the Arizona during the attack. Marilyn Walsh is here with her brother, who's a Navy veteran. Marilyn found Kay, it brought him down here as a guest. So again, thank you. Really enriches the program. This time I'd like to call on Superintendent Cash to say a few words.
Thank you, Bill. Good afternoon. All right. Commander Bonner, Mr. Tabbitt, Mr. Conley, Deputy Superintendent Rose Fennell, and I would like to thank you for gathering with us today as we honor the memory of those who were killed and those who survived the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor 71 years ago today, pushing our nation virtually into World War II. We gathered today in front of the destroyer USS Cassin Young, named for U.S. Navy Commander Cassin Young, who was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his heroism during that attack. Cassin Young was commissioned at the end of 1943 and first saw action in the Pacific, where she took part in the landings in the Philippines, rescued survivors from an aircraft carrier, and off Okinawa survived 2 separate kamikaze hits, one of which killed 22 crew members. Today we gathered here to honor and remember those who lived and were sacrificed. This ship has been here since 1978, where the National Park Service and many dedicated volunteers maintain it as a living memorial to the thousands of men and women who built, repaired, and served on Navy ships throughout the American history. Our servicemen and women are fighting for values represented, commemorated, and celebrated here at all of our national park sites service-wide. The National Park Service holds a unique place in America as manager of our nation's parks, as a guide and teacher, helping people to experience, value, and respect the meaning of our shared heritage, and as an advocate for the quality of life that is enriched by these places. It is an honor to serve you as your superintendent of Boston National Historical Park and Boston African American National Historic Site, and it is an honor to be with you here today. So thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Cash. At this time, I'd like to ask Commander Bonnet to come up and say a few words.
Good afternoon, Superintendent Cash, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and most importantly, the Pearl Harbor survivors. I'd like to thank you all for being here today as we remember the fateful events of December 7th, 1941. I would also like to extend my thanks to each and every veteran who is here with us this afternoon for your service to our great nation. It's an honor for me to be here today and share my thoughts with you about the attack on Pearl Harbor and what it means to us not only today, but also in the future. 71 years ago, on a quiet Sunday morning, America suffered a devastating attack that sunk numerous ships, destroyed countless aircraft, and killed over 2,000 people and wounded over 1,000 more. Despite those horrific losses, it could have been worse. Some may ask, well, how could it have been worse? We lost battleships, planes, and men. But we could have lost our carriers, which later took the fight to the enemy. We could have lost our repair facilities, which helped repair those damaged ships. We could have lost our fuel storage, which fueled our ships and planes in the battles that lie ahead. Perhaps I and many others look at those items that the Japanese did not destroy too optimistically. Did they really start the path to victory? I would say that that optimism is what made America strong then and makes America great today. We are a nation that, when confronted with challenges, finds a way to overcome rather than a reason to give up. This has been our trademark since our nation was founded 235 years ago. No one thought we could defeat the British and gain our independence, but we did. No one thought the small American Navy would be able to take on the British during the War of 1812 and win, but we did, as Constitution can attest. That sense of optimism is what gives us a strength, gives us hope, and enables us to achieve the impossible. Pearl Harbor, despite the devastation wrought that day, showed that we can recover and move forward. December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. Those words said by President Franklin Roosevelt the day after the attack comprise what may be the most famous or well-known phrase describing the events of that terrible day. But if you take the time to read or listen to the rest of what the President said, I think there's one statement that resonates a little more. At least it does with me. With the confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. It is within that statement that continues the spirit of optimism. The unbounding determination of our people, the American people, begins with each and every one of us. It is the underpinning of who and what we are as a people. We would be hard-pressed to find a better example of American resolve and that unbounding determination more on display than it was on that day. The reason we are here today is to remember the sacrifice of those who survived and honor those that did not. I'm an avid reader of history, especially naval history and the Pacific War in particular. A few years ago, I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to visit Pearl Harbor, and nothing I had read fully prepared me for the feelings I experienced during that trip. Like so many others, I went to the visitor center, walked through the exhibits, and saw the film they show of the attack, footage and recordings from that actual day. It was moving to hear the actual sounds of the attack and of the explosions, not some Hollywood production. I then boarded the water shuttle out to the Arizona. Words cannot describe the feeling you get setting foot on that memorial, overlooking the final resting spot of over 1,000 fellow sailors, seeing their names engraved on a large wall, seeing that flag still proudly flying over their ship, and seeing drops of oil still floating to the surface. It is one of the few places I have been where every visitor becomes extremely respectful of their surroundings, much like Arlington National Cemetery. The trip back to the visitor center was very quiet, as you could see people trying to process what they had seen. Some were sad, some were angry. I felt a mix of those feelings, and then headed over to the USS Missouri, moored right near the Arizona, the bookends of the war in the Pacific. To me, those two monuments serve as a reflection of the American traits of optimism and tenacity. We may have been knocked down, but we got back up and kept fighting until we won. Events like today are important to not only honor the past, but to also ensure the next generations do not forget what happened and why it was important. Keeping heritage alive is a daunting task, as my sailors can attest, but it is an important one. The task becomes even more challenging when the witnesses to the event are not here to tell their story or serve as a visible reminder. I've been fortunate to know a Pearl Harbor survivor, Mr. Ray Frazee of Wellesley, Mass., for most of my life, and have met many more during my time in the service. Knowing and meeting these survivors of that fateful day has provided me a personal connection to it and why we remember it and celebrate it today. I ask each one of you to take some time and talk to these survivors, establish that personal connection, and share it with others. Help keep the past alive. And ceremonies such as this are just one way we can continue to do that. I often say I have the honor and privilege to command 70 of the U.S. Navy's finest sailors. These amazing young men and women are a visible reminder of the Navy's continuing commitment to defend our country and our way of life. They are the latest in a long line of people who, as I saw recently in a quote, wrote a blank check payable to the United States of America for an amount up to and including their life. There's a saying that a ship's might is measured by our guns and her strength by our crew, and that saying is as true today as it was when Constitution first sailed. Simply put, these sailors are some of the finest sailors serving the Navy today. They carry on the legacy that was built at places such as Pearl Harbor. I am thankful for all those who have given so much for our country. Words can never sufficiently describe the events of that day to those who were there. But spending an hour or so to honor them is such an easy thing to do. I can tell you I'd be here even if I wasn't speaking. The sacrifice of those that have gone before us are important and should be recognized at every opportunity. By honoring one person or one group for a particular thing, such as those that fought at Pearl Harbor, we also honor all those who sacrificed for our country, and ultimately, we honor all of America. In closing, I would ask each one of you to take some time to ensure that we don't ever forget Pearl Harbor Day. We must pass on to the generation that follow that unbounding determination and optimism. We must pass on that we have to remain ever vigilant. Thank you again for coming today to honor these brave men and women who have given so much for our freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Commander Bonner. This year, the National Pearl Harbor Survivors Association actually disbanded. There weren't enough members to keep it alive and healthy, so let me echo those words and say, as Commander did, it's more important every year that we continue to remember Pearl Harbor Day. Before I ask Ranger Kordak to come up and make the connection between USS Cassin Young and Pearl Harbor, I'd like to recognize the USS Cassin Young Honor Guard over here to my left and on the bow of the ship. Cassin Young volunteers for the last nearly 30 years have put in over 200,000 hours of volunteer work time on that ship behind me to help preserve it and to help carry out the mission of the National Park Service, and I want to thank them. And lastly, I'd like to ask us to have a moment of silence for the two Pearl Harbor survivors that have been with us the last several years, Wayne Bratton and Bernard Murphy. Bernard, many of you who've been here the last few years would remember, no matter what the weather was, he was here. Last year I think he was soaked to the bone, and he still spoke eloquently about his memories and experience. They passed away the last several months, so a brief moment of silence and then we'll do our interpretive program. Our annual Pearl Harbor program has always included an interpretive presentation that makes the connection to USS Cassin Young, the ship, and to Commander Cassin Young, the man. I'd like to invite Ranger Vince Kordak to make this important connection for our audience.
There are many shades of danger, but now and then there appears a sinister violence of intention, indefinable something that forces it upon the mind and the heart of a man, that elemental furies abruptly come at him with a purpose of malice, a strength beyond control, an unbridled cruelty that means to smash, to destroy, to annihilate all that he has seen, known, loved, enjoyed, or hated. These furies mean to sweep his whole precious world utterly away by the simple and appalling act of taking his life. The above quote from Joseph Conrad's novel Lord Jim attests to the brutal reality we all might face when abruptly confronted by death. Death is a grim reality of existence, especially in time of war. But to see a thing coming is to be given a chance to prepare, to make ready to confront it, try and dodge it, perhaps overcome it, or at least accept that death could happen. My father made 5 opposed amphibious landings during World War II, including Omaha Beach on D-Day. And while death was always a possibility, or even a likelihood, in all those landings, extensive military and personal preparations and an enhanced period of time always preceded such operations. The surprise attack against the United States force in Oahu allowed for no such preparations. The sun that day rose on an island and nation at peace, and most persons in uniform awoke to anticipation of the minimal military duties of a typical Sunday. Virtually none of them expected that a day of calm would become a day of infamy. This is evidenced by the headlines from the Wheeling, West Virginia newspaper dated 8 December 1941 that many of you might see to the side here. About 15 minutes elapsed between first alarm and the massive explosion that turned battleship Arizona into a raging inferno, taking the lives of 1,177 men on that ship alone. Alongside Arizona was repair ship Vestal, which suffered both damages and casualties. What follows will focus on 3 men aboard Arizona and Vestal that morning: Isaac Kidd, Franklin Van Valkenburg, and Casson Young. All 3 received the Medal of Honor. Let the words of the medal citations bear witness as to how these men faced what was the defining moment of their lives. Rear Admiral Isaac Kidd, for conspicuous devotion to duty, extraordinary courage, and complete disregard of his own life during the attack, Rear Admiral Kidd immediately went to the bridge and courageously discharged his duties until USS Arizona, his flagship, blew up from a direct bomb hit on the bridge, which resulted in the loss of his life. Captain Franklin Van Valkenburg, for conspicuous devotion to duty, extraordinary courage, and complete disregard of his own life. During the attack as commanding officer of USS Arizona, Captain Van Valkenburg gallantly fought his ship. While directing the ship's defenses from the navigation bridge, Van Valkenburg declined to go to the armored conning tower, a less exposed position from Japanese strafing, and continued to man a telephone fighting his ship. Van Valkenburg gallantly fought his ship until USS Arizona blew up from magazine explosions and a direct bomb hit on the bridge, which resulted in the loss of his life. Commander Casson Young, for distinguished conduct in action, outstanding heroism, and utter regard of his own safety. During the attack as commanding officer of USS Vestal, Commander Young proceeded to the bridge and later took personal command of the 3-inch anti-aircraft gun. When blown overboard by the explosion of USS Arizona, he swam back to his ship. As a result of the explosion and several bomb hits, USS Vestal was afire in several places, with settling and taking on a list. Despite continued enemy bombing and strafing, Commander Young, with extreme coolness and calmness, moved his ship to an anchorage distant from USS Arizona and subsequently beached USS Vestal upon determining that such action was required to save his ship. No indecision, no succumbing to self-preservation, no failure of fortitude in the acts of these men. Their bravery and conduct merited not only the nation's highest award for valor, but also having their names affixed to 3 Fletcher-class destroyers. Equally amazing to myself, beyond these actions which earned Kidd, Van Valkenburg, and Casson Young such recognition, is the fact that of 175 Fletcher-class destroyers built here in Charlestown and elsewhere during World War II, only 4 presently survive. Of these 4, 2, USS Kidd, DD-661, and USS Casson Young, DD-793, are named for men described in my remarks. A reminder that which we call courage, when appended to destroyers named Kidd, Van Valkenburg, and Casson Young, epitomized without further words courage beyond measure in 3 individuals abruptly coming face to face with death 71 years ago today.
Thank you, Ranger Kordak. Excellent job as always. This time in the program, I'd like to have Donald Tabbitt come up and say a few words. Don, as I mentioned earlier, is former president of the Pearl Harbor Survivors and Friends Association. And he's been with us well over 20 years, and I thank you again for being here with us, Don.
This thing's been driving me crazy today, so I'll take it off. Thank you. I, in the past, have spoken to you people and at different organizations with papers in front of me. This time I'm doing it from my head. You know, I go back when I decided to join the Navy, and I want to let you get an idea of what I went through. I was a senior in high school, and they had finally brought along the idea of if you join before your 18th birthday, you only have to put in until the day before your 21st birthday instead of 6 years. Excuse me. So I joined up, and I was 18 years old. I went through boot camp, headed out to the West Coast in San Diego, and spent a course there in radio and how to operate and copy code. When I got away from that, then they transferred me down to Ford Island, which was in the middle of Pearl Harbor. And I got down there on November 4th. So I was there a month before the raid and able to get some strength into me as to what kind of a place we were in. Of course, we there weren't aware that Washington was doing its bit to get Japan to do something to us, which would force us to get into the war, because he wanted to declare war, President Roosevelt, on Japan, Germany, and Italy. But a lot of the American people would have crucified him. So here we were with the Atlantic Ocean on this side and the Pacific Ocean on that side. Who the hell is going to bother us? Well, we give thanks in a way to Japan for making that raid in Pearl, and thankful that they didn't come here to the States to do it. And it was pretty rough. They came in, the battleships, submarines, and the aircraft carriers and the smaller ships had pulled into Pearl a couple of days before the raid. So they were pretty well settled down. The carriers were given orders, and they took off shortly after they pulled into Pearl. And they were sent way up north to Wake Island to deliver some planes and equipment. And little did they know that this was President Roosevelt's way of getting them out of harm's way, and the Japanese didn't know that carriers weren't in Pearl. So when the Japanese came along and hit us on December 7th, the first thing they went to was the different air stations around the island. And this being a Sunday morning, and we found out everybody was being prepared for inspection. So all the planes were all in a row at the different stations outside of the hangars. So they were easy targets for the Japanese, who came in and shot them up, did a terrific job as far as they were concerned. Consequently, we only had one plane that wasn't hit and wasn't kept out of the air. And he did what little he could to help us get rid of the Japanese. So then they hit us there at Pearl. And it was quite a thing. I had been out the night before and had had a few too many beers, had a hangover, and I found out one thing. That raid was a hell of a good way to cure a hangover, but I sure as hell don't recommend it. But I woke up that morning anyway and ran out onto the porch, or lanai as they call it, and got to the screen and looked up just as the Japanese plane came over, short distance above the barracks. And how do I know it was Japanese? Big red rising sun painted on the bottom side of the wings. So I said, this is no practice. And I put on my clothes and ran downstairs because I was going to try to get over to the ad building to get in the radio shack, which was there to where I usually belong. Master at Arms stopped me at the door. He says, this building is the safest place to be. It's a 3-story steel reinforced concrete building. And he said, you're safer here than anywhere. Well, the barracks was along this way that I'm pointing out, with a street right in front of us. And over this side of the barracks, going out toward the harbor, was the administration building. And over this side of the field that was right out in front of us was the sick bay. And I'll get to them in a minute. The field was just grass. And you could see all the way across, maybe about 100 feet to the shoreline. And we could see some of the ships that were moored there. And as we were watching, the Japanese planes came in and dropped torpedoes and bombs and caught the California first. And the water in Pearl Harbor in certain areas, instead of being like this, it was more like this. The California started to sink, and she went down, boom, just like that, and then stopped dead on the bottom of the harbor. And the water was just below the main deck. That's how shallow the water was there. And the Oklahoma, who was just up ahead of her, was doing a firing. And all of a sudden, she got hit so bad that she heeled over on her side. And that took care of her. And the other battleships were up, houses up here now, were up along there. And we couldn't see them, but we heard them. The Arizona was hit with a bomb that did such a job that it broke through into the area where all the guns and bullets and weapons were kept. And they were hit so bad that they all exploded, and the ship came right up into the air, and she was split in half, and then she sank. And that today is where the Arizona Memorial is, up above her, and it's quite a thing. And I've said I'd like to go down to Pearl, but if I did, I would have a tough time trying to see anything. I'd be crying so much, because it would bring back a lot of memories. There was a lot of oil had gotten out of the ships that were damaged, and those that on the ships that were told to get off the ships had to swim ashore. Excuse me. And they swam ashore and walked across this field into the barracks, and they were going into the mess hall to be cleaned up. Now this was interesting, because you look at something coming up the walk, and it's a moving blob of oil. And that was all that you could see, was a black oil, except if he opened his eyes, opened his mouth, you could see the light there. But otherwise it was just a moving black oil. And I remember when the Arizona blew up, the windows all broke, and there was some glass left that had landed on the deck, on the floor. And I can remember I said, "Watch out for the broken glass." Got an answer from one of the guys coming in. He says, "Who gives a damn about broken glass?" I didn't see one man even cut his feet, and they were coming in barefooted. So that was quite an action there. Now I mentioned the sick bay, where it was down here. And those that were injured were brought into the sick bay. The wards had not been prepared to handle the many people that were coming in. So they had taken those inside on the deck and put mattresses down up against the wall. Now this was a square building, and the offices and wards were on the outside edge of the building, and the whole inside was open to the outside world. And there was a tile floor in there. It was a beautiful sight. Well, we found out the Japanese got word that that was not a sick bay. it was an ammunition dump, and they wanted to destroy it. So when the wards were made ready, the men were on the mattresses in the open area were carried into the wards. They were just carrying the last guy into the ward. The door was being closed behind him when the Japanese plane came over and dropped a bomb. The bomb landed about 2 feet away from absolute dead center of that open area and broke through the floor a little bit before it exploded. So the force of the explosion was more this way than this way. But of course there was enough of explosion that broke windows and then punctured holes in the stucco walls. Not one person was injured. Everybody in that sick bay got away without being injured or killed, which to me was amazing. I think I said, I don't remember whether I said it or not, the aircraft carriers had been set out to Wake Island because they didn't want them in when the Japs hit us. They had gotten out there and turned around and were starting back when they got word that what was happening in Pearl. And they got all their planes together and had them take off and head out to where they thought the Japanese were. And they were going to raise hell with the Japanese. But by then, the Japanese had decided, we've done enough damage here, let's get out of here. And they got all their planes back and turned around, were heading back home to Japan. And these guys didn't see any of them. So that event had to take place later on in the war. Now, this is not very much, but it does give you an idea of some of the things that happened that day. And I haven't remembered all of them, but after 71 years, it's amazing that I can remember those few things that happened. I don't know how many more years I'm going to be able to get up here and speak to you people here and the people that come in. But every time that I do come, it's such a pleasure to shake your hands, stand there and have my picture taken, and just speak to you. And I get nice comments from those that heard me that they enjoyed hearing about some of the things that happened to us. So that's it. And I thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Don. At this time, I'd like to invite Superintendent Cash, Commander Bonner, Emery Arsenal, Don Tabbitt, Francis Conley, and Jerry Halterman to join me in placing the commemorative wreath. This will be followed by a rifle gun salute on USS Cass and Young done by the Marine Corps Society, and then taps, and then finally a salute by USS Constitution, firing one gun. Folks, before we end our program, I've had a request from one of our Pearl Harbor survivors, Jerry Halterman, crew member on the USS Oklahoma, has asked to speak. I'm sorry that that wasn't part of the program. We didn't know Jerry was going to be here, but of course, I'm going to allow him to speak. So, before we conclude, Pearl Harbor survivor Jerry. Thank you, Jerry.
I would like to tell you that the 6 years I had in the Navy has the most wonderful happenings to me. And I give credit. It also happened to my two brothers that were in the thick of all the fighting in the Pacific. September 1939, when I got called into the Navy, I had just heard a speech by Hitler, and if you ever heard a crazy man, that was a crazy man. However, my mother was a one-room country school teacher, and she had the foresight to think, now what can I do? Here I've raised this son, he's going off to war, I may never see him again. So she said, Gerald, come over here in the side room, get on your knees, and we're going to pray for your safety. By golly, the timing all night has been a miracle in my lifetime, because every opportunity that opened up and that I took advantage of helped me along the way. And I can tell you that will stay with that son or daughter all of their life. It's still with me. It's still working with me. And that is the other thing, to check out with the recruiter, find out what opportunities might be in the service, and do some thinking about how you can work into those areas. And the area that really helped me was to get into the office, into the communications. And quartermaster is another good one, where you don't have to carry a gun all the time. So I'd like to leave those thoughts with you for whatever value they may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry, for that wonderful career advice. We appreciate it. And I think we're going to have some competition next year with Dawn and Jerry. And before we conclude, I'd like to thank all of you again for being here with us for this very important occasion. I want to thank, again, the USS Constitution Color Guard, all of our guests here who help us carry on this tradition, and everyone that has assisted in putting this together. So many people here. So thank you again for being with us. That concludes our program today.
This is Jerry. Okay? What's your name?
Jerry, I'm Francisco Urena with the Veterans Office. How are you today?
Good, thank you.
And you are one of the Pearl Harbor survivors, correct?
Yes, I think I typed the first message of World War II out in 14th Naval District.
Sure.
Yeah.
And how was your experience in the Navy prior to Pearl Harbor?
Very good, because for one thing, like I said, that the officers, if they knew you were serious about something, they'd get behind you and push you on it.
Sure.
And so I had a very good experience with a Naval Academy aboard the Oklahoma. They had a study going for the Naval Academy exam,
Sure.
that kind of thing. I didn't make it that way, but I made it with a Navy V-12 officer training. And they were training me for a landing craft for the invasion of Japan. And thank God Truman dropped the bomb and eliminated the need for that. So I ended up going to the Harvard Business School instead, and I met my wife
Excellent.
there.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Oh, Jerry, it's a great pleasure to speak with you this morning, this afternoon, and remembering 71 years later these horrific attack on Pearl Harbor. We look forward to seeing you again here in the near future, and thank you for your service and welcome home.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Jerry, here we are on Pearl Harbor Day. It's an honor to meet you. Actually, you and the other three boys here are the first Pearl Harbor vets I've actually met in the flesh, so I'm honored to be here and honored to be able to chance to talk with you.
Well, thank you. It reminds me when I was young and I was greeting the Civil War.
What rate were you in the Navy?
I ended up being a yeoman.
A yeoman. That's why you said a yeoman is a good career choice.
I learned to type, and typists were really wanted then, particularly by the officers, to type their letters home and
You know,
things like
it's
that.
funny you said that. My father joined in 1940, and he went to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and they said, was there anyone here that knows how to type? And he put his hand up even though he didn't know how to type. He ended up being the guy who typed out the Liberty cards. He said, I was the most popular guy at the Brooklyn Navy Yard.
Absolutely.
You wanted a Liberty card, you came to see me.
And you're not out there drilling
Exactly.
at that time like the others are having to do.
Right. So how long did you stay in the Navy? Till the end of the war?
I stayed in 6 years, yeah.
6 years.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Which was what I had to enlist for.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. But it passed very quick, and I had a lot of wonderful experiences during that time.
It sounded like it during your speech. It sounded like you really enjoyed your time. I love my time in the Navy.
Yeah.
Probably one of my best times during the year is when I get to spend my active duty time and be with my shipmates and go have a great time.
That was a great experience.
Right.
I have to
Did
think
you,
about some of my words now.
How long did you stay in Pearl after the attack? Did you spend most of your time there?
We went out there with the fleet in 1940.
Okay. All right. So Jerry, tell me a little bit about your career after Pearl Harbor. You said you went out with the fleet in 1940.
I went out there in 1939, actually, out of San Diego training station. There. They put me aboard the Oklahoma because I told them I wanted to try to get into the Naval Academy. And they had a three-man class there. None of us made
Okay.
it that way, but we made it in the Navy V-12 program when it came along. So
Excellent.
I got my commission then, and I ended up with lieutenant junior grade.
Oh, I didn't know I was talking to an officer. I better start saluting you pretty soon. So anyway, on the eve of the Army-Navy game, I was just curious how the Army and the Navy got along out there in Pearl Harbor.
The Army and the Navy, General Short and Admiral Kimmel were sent out there to bolster up the defenses. Now, General Short, his charge was the shorelines and everything, and Kimmel's was the Navy. And government secrets that were dispensed were not talked about between the two of them. They didn't bother to do that.
Is that because they didn't like each other?
No, it was because their ego, they wanted to keep the information to themselves, I think. That was it. And if they had been, so the government learned a lesson out of that. You don't put two guys out there in separate positions without putting someone over them.
Right. So you need one person ultimately responsible and in charge. You can't have two equal commanders out there trying to do the same thing and not necessarily agreeing with each other.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was an important lesson that I hope they learned.
All right. So Jerry, what ship were you on during the attack?
I wasn't on a ship during the attack. I transferred off of the battleship Oklahoma in April of 1941, and thank God I happened to be on duty and typed a message where they wanted the yeoman yeoman third class for shore duty. Now the baseball manager tried to talk me into staying aboard, but something told me I'd better take that shore duty because it doesn't come around very often.
So I'm assuming you were a pretty good baseball player if the baseball manager wanted to
Well,
keep you on the ship?
Yeah, I thought I was. At least they gave me a new uniform. And
So you were ashore. Were you injured at all during the attack?
no, I wasn't injured at all during my 6 years in the Navy. And like I say, when I said here, I think I owe it, a whole lot of it, to the fact that my mother pulled me aside back in Carbondale, Illinois, and said, "Let's pray for your safety." And it not only worked for me, but it worked for my two brothers also. And they were in the thick of everything.
I think somebody greater than yourself was looking out for you when all three of you were out there in the South
I-
Pacific.
I believe it, and I still believe it's looking after me. And that's why I mentioned here to the people that it'd be a wonderful thing to do to let their son or daughter know how much they feel about them, and it'll last all their life. You know? So
I have 3 children myself, 3 teenagers. One of them is looking into the service right now, and I hope he's as safe as you were during your time.
yeah.
How many years have you been coming to the service here at Charleston Navy Yard?
Oh, I've been here about 4 times. We've thrown reefs into the harbor with Don Tabbitt here, where he headed up the Pearl Harbor survivors. But he kind of arbitrarily closed down the whole situation. I don't know. I wasn't too keen on that. I know that it was getting to be too much out of that. I recognize that.
How many Pearl Harbor survivors are there in the local area? Do you know?
In Framingham, there wasn't any, and I don't know. Maybe there's 1 or 2 in one of the others, but most of them have passed away.
Right. I know my dad, who joined in 1940, dropped out of high school. He's going to be 90 next year. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking, most of the Pearl Harbor survivors have to be in their late 80s, early
yeah.
90s, easy.
Oh yes. Yeah. And about the only way you can find out is to check the veterans office in the different towns, because they try to keep in touch with everyone.
Yep.
But even on the national level, there's not very many.
Right. It's definitely dwindling. But anyway, Jerry, it's been an honor to spend some time with you today and talk with you. And God bless you and thank you for your service. And hope to see you here next year.
Thank you.
And I will be here if you're here.
Thank you.
Okay.
I see you've got 3 battle stars.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We'll be there.
One thing.
Oh.
One thing that.
If your arm isn't tired, you
Ah.
keep going.
All right. Is he always like this?
Yes.
Yeah. He's quite a genius. Yeah.
Say something.
One thing that isn't talked about very much, but was very important, was that the Japanese left the oil tanks all around Pearl Harbor because they thought they were going to come back and use it. That kind of thing.
Oh, they were going to use them if they invaded?
Yeah. Now, if they had hit the oil tanks too, I mean, it was a blazing inferno anyway from the ships being hit. Now, the other thing was the ships weren't supposed to be able to be hit by torpedoes because they weren't supposed to operate in the 40-foot waters of Pearl Harbor. But the Japs figured out a way to do that. They took the heavy steel fins off and put thin wooden ailerons on and kept them on the surface of the water. And so they hit the blisters and ruptured the oil and all that.
Wow.
But if they had hit that oil tanks, it would really have been.
It would have been.
Oh,
game
yeah.
over.
Not only that, but it would have delayed our hitting our Midway victory in June the 4th of 1942.
Right.
There. And I was on duty when a message came in from Midway from the pilots addressed Admiral Nimitz a short distance from us, saying that they had sighted 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. Now the message came back via our office to Midway, saying, "Exterminate the bastards." That's all he said.
Yeah.
Say your name.
Franklin Van Valkenburg. Hi, Jerry.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Well, thank you.
And so you saw the Arizona.
Yes, I did. I had just turned in from being on a midnight watch down in the communications office, and I had typed a message from the USS Ward saying they had fired on and dropped depth charges on a submarine operating at the mouth of the harbor. Then I was relieved to walk back to the receiving station for breakfast and shower and turn in. I no sooner turned in than I hear this awful roar, and I go to the front of the building, and here's the Japanese planes with us in their flight path down on the harbor. They were, and that's the only reason they didn't bomb the hell out of it and kill me, was because of that. And I owe all of that, I think, to my mother's prayers for my safety.
I understand.
It's still with me.
It's something that I've heard a lot about, of course, as I was growing up.
Yeah,
It's been hard for me to imagine.
yeah, yeah. Because, you know, a woman spends 9 months coming up with a child, and then I have to let him go to war and not know they're going to see him again. There's very little they can do other than pray for the safety.
Absolutely. Well, it's very nice to meet you, Jerry.
Thank you.
It's really an honor.
Yeah.